A major geopolitical shock is unfolding now. NATO has officially accelerated the delivery of U.S. made weapons to Ukraine, not just as routine military aid, but as part of what insiders are now calling a punish Russia strategy, a plan designed to squeeze Moscow harder than at any point since the war began. And for the first time, fragments of this strategy have been exposed to the public. Behind the scenes, European governments have quietly poured billions into a new weapons pipeline, enabling faster deployment of Patriot systems, long-range artillery, and advanced counter-drone technologies. Western officials say Ukraine must not collapse, but critics warn that this sudden surge of powerful American weapons could trigger a dangerous chain reaction, one the world may not be ready for. Because the moment the news broke, Moscow erupted. Vladimir Putin issued one of his sharpest warnings to date, accusing NATO of crossing a historic red line and threatening retaliation reminiscent of the world's most perilous moments of the past. His message was not vague. It was not diplomatic. It was a direct signal that Russia is preparing countermeasures that could reshape the conflict entirely. And now a chilling question is being raised in capitals around the world. Is this the moment when the Ukraine war enters its most dangerous phase? History has shown, from the Cuban Missile Crisis to the proxy wars of the Cold War, that escalation between nuclear powers can spiral faster than expected. Now, we look at what NATO is really planning, why Russia is reacting this fiercely, and what the worst-case scenario might look like. Because for the first time in months, analysts say the balance is shifting and not necessarily towards stability. To understand why NATO moved this quickly, we need to look at the shifting battlefield realities. Over the past several months, Ukraine has faced critical shortages in air defense missiles, long-range artillery shells, armored units, and advanced drone countering systems. Russian forces, meanwhile, have intensified offensives along multiple fronts, exploiting gaps in Ukraine's defenses and pushing deeper into contested regions. European intelligence agencies warned that without rapid reinforcement, Ukraine's defensive lines could fracture, creating conditions that might allow Russia to dictate terms on the ground. For NATO, allowing that to happen was simply not an option. This is why, during recent high-level discussions, European leaders quietly reached consensus. They must accelerate, not merely maintain, the flow of U.S. weapons. Washington, with its massive industrial capacity, remains the only supplier capable of delivering large quantities at speed. Through mechanisms like the prioritized Ukraine requirements list, European funding will now directly finance rapid deliveries from American manufacturers, bypassing months of bureaucratic delay. For NATO, this isn't just about supporting Kyiv. It's about shaping the entire trajectory of the conflict. A stronger Ukraine means a weaker Russian negotiating position. A weaker Russia, in NATO's view, means greater deterrence for the future. But this acceleration comes with risks. By tightening pressure around Russia, NATO may be triggering the very outcome it hopes to avoid: a sudden escalation fueled by Moscow's belief that the West is now committed to a long-term confrontation. And that is why analysts say this moment feels different, heavier, more volatile, and far more unpredictable. The Kremlin's response to NATO's accelerated weapons push has been immediate, sharp, and historically alarming. Speaking with an intensity not seen in months, Vladimir Putin accused NATO of crossing a fundamental red line and warned that Russia would respond with measures that will alter the course of this conflict. His tone recalled moments in history when superpowers felt cornered and reacted in ways that reshaped global security. Russian officials have already hinted at several potential countermeasures: intensified missile strikes on Ukrainian supply hubs, broader cyber operations targeting NATO states, and expanded military coordination with China and Iran. Analysts note that this mirrors patterns seen during the Cold War, when pressure on one side triggered parallel escalations on the other. More concerning is Moscow's suggestion that it may deploy advanced weapons systems closer to NATO borders, a move reminiscent of the prelude to the Cuban Missile Crisis, when rival powers use strategic positioning to send unmistakable warnings. In essence, Putin's reaction reflects a belief that NATO's new strategy is not simply about aiding Ukraine, but about undermining Russia's long-term power. And when Russia feels its geopolitical survival is threatened, history shows its responses can be unpredictable and often dangerous. As NATO accelerates the flow of U.S. weapons into Ukraine, a question quietly resurfaces in diplomatic circles and military think tanks. What if history is preparing to repeat itself? Because the pattern we see now, escalation answered by counter-escalation, echoes some of the most dangerous chapters of the past. One of the most alarming scenarios resembles the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, a moment when two nuclear powers misread each other's intentions and brought the world within minutes of catastrophe. In today's conflict, if Russia perceives NATO's weapons surge as a direct preparation for a deeper Western intervention, Moscow could respond with its own strategic deployments, missiles repositioned, nuclear systems moved, or high alert postures declared. Even if intended as signaling, such moves could trigger a spiral of fear, misinterpretation, and rapid escalation. Another parallel emerges from the proxy wars of the Cold War era, Afghanistan, Angola, Vietnam, where superpowers funneled weapons into regional conflicts in an effort to weaken each other indirectly. These wars dragged on for years, consumed staggering resources, and often expanded beyond their original borders. Analysts warn that Ukraine is now showing similar traits. A battlefield where two global blocs are testing endurance, technology, and political will. If both sides double down, the conflict could evolve into a prolonged, grinding standoff with far wider consequences for Europe's stability. A third scenario recalls the Balkan conflicts of the 1990 seconds, where miscalculations, nationalist ambitions, and foreign involvement turned regional tensions into widespread destruction. Should Russia decide to retaliate beyond Ukraine, targeting transport routes in Poland, Romania, or the Black Sea, even unintentionally harming NATO personnel, a dangerous threshold could be crossed. Article 5 of the NATO Charter would instantly become part of the discussion, and geopolitical pressure could force leaders into decisions they cannot easily reverse. The final and darkest scenario mirrors Russia's own pattern in Georgia 2008 and Crimea 2014. Rapid, decisive strikes aimed at changing facts on the ground before the West has time to react. If Moscow fears NATO's new strategy will eventually cripple its military position, it may pursue bold offensives to secure more territory or weaken Ukraine's infrastructure dramatically. All these possibilities share one common root: escalation without communication. And history shows that when great powers stop understanding each other, the outcome is rarely controlled and never safe. As the strategic landscape shifts, the consequences of NATO's accelerated weapons program are beginning to ripple far beyond the battlefield. For Ukraine, the influx of U.S.-made systems offers an essential lifeline, not just strengthening its defenses, but restoring confidence that Western support will not falter. Yet this lifeline comes with greater dependency. Kyiv now relies increasingly on a level of Western backing that must be sustained politically, economically, and militarily for years. For Europe, the decision marks a difficult turning point. European governments are committing billions of dollars to a conflict with no clear endpoint, placing pressure on national budgets already strained by inflation and energy instability. At the same time, Europe's security architecture is becoming more tightly bound to American industrial output, reducing long-term strategic autonomy, a paradox many leaders are unwilling to address publicly. For the United States, the surge in weapons production strengthens its global leadership role, but also exposes deep political divisions at home about the sustainability of foreign commitments. Washington gains influence, but it also inherits new responsibilities and risks. And for Russia, the consequences may be the most severe. An increasingly isolated Moscow must now prepare for prolonged confrontation. Economic strain, military losses, and diplomatic pressure will intensify. Yet history suggests that great powers under pressure often act unpredictably, taking risks they would otherwise avoid. In essence, NATO's acceleration is not merely a tactical adjustment. It is a structural shift, one that will define the strategic balance of Europe for years and potentially shape the next major chapter of global security. The acceleration of U.S. weapons to Ukraine marks more than a tactical shift. It signals a new strategic phase with far-reaching implications. NATO has made its intentions unmistakably clear. It will not allow Ukraine to collapse, and it is willing to deepen its involvement despite Russia's warnings. But with every shipment, the margin for miscalculation narrows. History teaches that major conflicts rarely escalate in a single dramatic moment. They intensify step by step through decisions that feel necessary at the time until one move finally crosses an unseen threshold. Many analysts now believe the world is approaching such a threshold. The sharpness of Putin's reaction, the scale of NATO's commitment, and the absence of meaningful dialogue between the two sides all point to a geopolitical environment that is increasingly fragile. What happens next will depend not only on weapons and strategies, but on restraint or the lack of it from both Moscow and the West. A worst-case scenario is not inevitable, but it is no longer unthinkable. As the conflict enters this dangerous new chapter, one truth remains. The decisions made now will shape Europe's security, global stability, and the future balance of power for years to come.